I was 34 when I realized my family never loved me, at least not the way I had always imagined. For years, I told myself they were simply strict, traditional, maybe a little cold. I made excuses for their cruelty the way a child hides bruises behind long sleeves. I used to think that love was something you had to earn, something that only came when you proved your worth. But that belief would become the chain that bound me to their betrayal. I grew up in a small town by the sea. My parents ran a modest grocery shop, and I was the eldest daughter, the one expected to sacrifice, to obey, to give up dreams in exchange for keeping peace. My younger brother, Michael, was the golden child. Everything about him, his laughter, his mistakes, even his failures, was forgivable. Mine were not. When he dropped out of college, they bought him a car to lift his spirits. When I got accepted to a university scholarship, my father said, "We can't afford to lose you at the store." So I stayed. I stayed because daughters like me were not meant to fly. We were meant to hold the ground together while others soared. By the time I turned 30, I had learned to smile through silence. I managed the store alone when my parents grew tired, paid their debts quietly, and even helped Michael start his small business. When he needed $20, ling ling ling, I broke my savings account. I didn't even hesitate. Family comes first. That's what my mother used to say. I never realized she meant everyone except you. The first signs of betrayal came disguised as celebration. One humid summer afternoon, my father called me into the living room, his tone unusually gentle. My mother was sitting beside him, her hands folded tightly. Michael stood near the window, looking anywhere but at me. My father cleared his throat. "You know the house," he said. "The one your grandfather built?" I nodded. "It was our family home, small but sacred. We've decided to sell it," he said slowly, "to help Michael expand his business." I froze. "Sell it? But that's our home. That's where Mom's garden is, where Grandpa's ashes." "Enough." My mother snapped. "You have your own apartment. Don't be selfish." That word selfish burned through me like acid. It was always the weapon they used to silence me. I wanted to shout, to say that I'd given them everything, that every piece of my life had been a gift to them. But my throat betrayed me. I simply nodded, pretending to understand. A week later, the house was gone, sold to a stranger for a price far below its worth. Michael got his money. My parents smiled with pride. I was left with the echo of empty rooms and the smell of freshly cut betrayal. I tried to rebuild. I worked harder at the accounting firm where I had finally found some independence. My colleagues often told me I was too composed, that I never showed anger or sadness. If only they knew that my calm was not peace, it was exhaustion disguised as grace. Then came the day everything collapsed. It was a Sunday morning when I got the call. My father's voice trembled. "Sweetheart, we need your help. Michael, he's in trouble." Trouble was an understatement. He had lost his company in a bad investment and borrowed from loan sharks to cover it. The debt was enormous. My parents begged me to meet them at the bank. "Just co-sign the documents," my mother said. "It's only temporary. Family helps family." I remember the smell of coffee on the banker's desk, the pen trembling in my hand, the way Michael avoided my eyes. Something felt wrong. My instincts whispered, "Don't sign." But my father's voice, heavy with guilt, broke me. "If you don't help, they'll hurt him. You'll regret it forever." So I signed. 3 months later, I received a notice from the court. The business loan had defaulted. As the co-signer, I was responsible for $180. Nil-inch debt. My savings. My apartment. Everything was at risk. When I confronted them, my mother didn't even look ashamed. "You earn more than us," she said coldly. "You can handle it. It's not the end of the world." That night, I sat alone in my empty apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of every sacrifice I had made. My hands were shaking as I read the documents over and over. The truth hit me like a blade. My family hadn't asked for help. They had used me. They had sold my name, my trust, my future. For weeks, I lived in quiet collapse. I went to work, smiled at clients, pretended to function, but inside, I was hollow. One evening, as I packed boxes to move out of my apartment, I found an old photo me at 12, standing between my parents and Michael, holding a homemade birthday cake. My smile was wide, innocent. I stared at that little girl and whispered, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." Something changed in me that night. Grief hardened into resolve. If they could use me like a pawn, then I would learn how to play the board. Revenge wasn't born from hatred. It was born from survival. I started by pulling every financial record, every bank statement, every signature I had ever made for them. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. They had been moving money through my name for years. Credit cards, loans, even insurance claims. My parents had used my trust as a disguise for theft. Michael had registered his company under my tax ID. They didn't just betray me, they built their entire comfort on my back. But this time, I didn't confront them with tears. I hired an attorney. Quietly, I began shifting my accounts, securing evidence, and protecting my assets. Melavier, a woman named Clara, looked at me with quiet admiration one afternoon. "You're remarkably calm," she said. "Most people would fall apart." I smiled faintly. "I already did," I replied. The next few months were a storm I orchestrated in silence. Every document I filed, every call I made, every smile I faked at Sunday lunches, it was all part of the rebuild. I knew they would come to me again soon, because greed never sleeps. And when they did, I would be ready. And they did come. My mother called one evening, her tone suddenly warm. "Your brother is starting a new company," she said sweetly. "He wants you to be part of it. Isn't that wonderful?" I almost laughed. "Part of it? Of course." I told her I'd think about it. That night, I drafted a proposal with forged terms, fake investors, phantom profits, and a clause that would legally bind them to disclose all assets under their name. I sent it to them, pretending it was an investment opportunity. Within days, both my parents and Michael had signed. The moment they did, every hidden account they owned became visible under the investigation I had already triggered. What followed was chaos: tax fraud, unreported income, unpaid loans. I didn't have to lift a finger. The system did it for me. For the first time in my life, I watched justice walk into their lives not through shouting or revenge, but through truth. And yet, I didn't feel joy. I felt something deeper. Release. The day the bank seized my parents' house, he stood outside, watching the movers carry out furniture I had bought years ago. My mother glared at me from the doorway, her eyes filled with venom. "You did this?" she hissed. I met her gaze, calm and unshaken. "No," I said softly. "You did." For once, she had no words. That night, I drove to the old beach house, the one they'd sold long ago. It was still standing, quietly weathered, now owned by a kind old couple who let me walk through the garden. The sea was calm. The air smelled of salt and memory. I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "It's over." Or at least, I thought it was. I thought the storm was over. I thought exposing them, watching them crumble under the weight of their own greed, it would be enough to quiet the ache inside me. But I was wrong. Revenge doesn't erase pain, it only unmasks it. For months after the lawsuit, I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, mind replaying every moment I had believed their lies. The silence of my apartment became unbearable, every shadow whispering memories I didn't want to face. One evening, I sat by the window with a cup of cold tea. watching the city lights blur against the glass. The reflection staring back at me didn't feel like me anymore. My face looked older, harder. My eyes, once soft and hopeful, had learned to expect nothing. I had spent years giving everything to people who treated love like currency. And even now that I had taken it all back, I felt empty. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, careful. My father's. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "We've lost everything." It began. "Your mother is sick. Michael moved away. We don't expect forgiveness. But if you can, please visit." The words didn't pierce me the way they once would have. They fell flat, like an echo I'd already heard. Still, something inside me, the foolish daughter who once believed family was sacred, wanted closure. Against my better judgment, I drove back to my childhood town. The shop was gone. In its place stood an empty building with broken windows and a faded sign that still read Richard's Grocery. The air smelled of dust and decay. My parents were living in a small rented house behind the old church. When my mother opened the door, I barely recognized her. Her hair had turned completely white. Her hands shook as she clutched the doorframe. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of something familiar: fear, regret, or maybe shame. "Come in," she said softly. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of medicine and old memories. My father sat in a chair by the window, his eyes distant. He looked smaller, defeated. On the table beside him was a stack of unpaid bills. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," he murmured. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My mother began to cry quietly at first, then harder. "We thought we were doing what was best for the family. Michael, he was always weak. We just wanted him to succeed." I stared at her, trying to find the woman who had once kissed my forehead before school, who used to hum lullabies in the kitchen. All I could see was someone who had traded love for loyalty to her favorite child. "You destroyed your daughter for your son," I said quietly. She sobbed harder. But I couldn't feel pity. Not anymore. My father looked at me, eyes wet. "Do you hate us?" I thought about that for a long time. Hate was easy. What I felt was deeper, a mixture of grief and clarity. "No," I said. "I finally understand you. That's worse." I left the house without looking back. The air outside felt heavier than the one I'd entered. The wind smelled of the same salt that once carried my childhood laughter. I drove to the old pier where I used to sit and dream. The ocean was dark that night, its waves restless and cold, mirroring everything inside me. As I watched the tide crash against the shore, I realized revenge had given me power, but it hadn't given me peace. I had punished them. Yes, but I had also lost pieces of myself in the process. Every calculated move, every victory, had chipped away at the part of me that used to believe in kindness. For weeks after that visit, I drifted through life like a ghost. Work felt meaningless. Friends invited me out. But I declined. I didn't want laughter. I wanted silence, the kind that could cleanse. One evening, I walked by a bookstore on my way home. Inside, a small sign caught my eye, writing "Workshop for Personal Healing." On impulse, I went in. The class was small, 7 people, all strangers, each with their own invisible wounds. The instructor, a calm woman in her 60s, asked us to write about the moment everything changed. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. For the first time in years, I began to write, not numbers, not contracts, not revenge plans, but my truth. Every word bled onto the page like confession. I wrote about my childhood, the way my mother looked at Michael, the day they sold our home, the bank documents, the courtroom, the pier. And as I wrote, something shifted. The bitterness that had clung to me began to loosen, like a knot finally unraveling. After class, the instructor approached me. "You have a powerful story," she said. But what's most powerful is that you're still here to tell it. That night, I cried not from pain, but from release. Over the next year, I kept writing. The pages piled up until they became a manuscript, a story of betrayal, survival, and forgiveness that wasn't for them, but for me. I didn't publish it under my real name. I didn't want fame. I just wanted to leave something behind that proved I existed beyond what they made me. Months later, the book found readers. Strangers wrote letters telling me my story gave them courage to walk away from their own toxic families. Some said they found their strength through my pain. And in those letters, I found a strange kind of redemption. One afternoon, while sorting through my mail, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper in shaky handwriting. We read your book. We didn't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you for giving it anyway. Mom and Dad. I stared at it for a long time. My hands didn't shake this time. I smiled small, real, and free. I didn't need their apology, but I finally understood something. Forgiveness isn't about freeing the people who hurt you. It's about freeing yourself from carrying their weight. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to the coast again. The same beach where everything began. The same sea that had witnessed both my pain and my rebirth. I walked barefoot on the wet sand, the sun rising softly over the horizon. The water touched my feet, cold but gentle, and I whispered to the wind, I'm done surviving. I'm living now. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. It's strange how peace feels almost foreign when you've lived most of your life inside chaos. In the months after my trip to the coast, I began to rebuild myself quietly, not through grand gestures, but through small, ordinary acts of healing. I started waking up early, cooking breakfast just for me, playing music in the kitchen. I planted herbs on the balcony and painted my living room in soft colors that reminded me of sunrise. These tiny things, insignificant to anyone else, became sacred rituals. For so long, I had lived in reaction to others, my parents' expectations, my brother's needs, society's rules about what a good daughter should be. Now, for the first time, I was living in response to myself. The freedom was terrifying. There were mornings I woke up and instinctively reached for my phone to check if my mother had called, if Michael had sent another desperate message, if anyone needed me. There never was. And that silence, once unbearable, slowly became my peace. I didn't hear from my family for nearly a year. My lawyer occasionally updated me on the legal consequences of the financial fraud community service. Restitution. Probation. I didn't rejoice. I didn't gloat. I simply accepted that justice had been done and moved on. Then one afternoon, as I left work, I saw a familiar figure waiting outside my office building. My heart skipped. It was Michael. He looked nothing like the brother I once knew. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow, his face pale and tired. He walked toward me slowly, as if every step cost him something. "Hi," he said softly. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, trying to reconcile this broken man with the one who had stood beside my parents as they destroyed me. "I'm not here to ask for money," he said quickly, sensing my hesitation. I needed to see you." He sighed. "Why?" He looked down, his voice trembling. "Because I finally understand what I did. What we did, and I can't live with it anymore." We stood in silence for a long time, the city moving around us, cars, people, noise. But in that moment, it felt like we were standing outside of time. "Mom's gone," he said quietly. "Cancer." It was fast. My breath caught. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Sadness, relief. Nothing came. I just nodded. "She wanted to see you," he continued. "She said she was sorry. She wanted you to know that." I didn't cry. I couldn't. The tears had dried years ago. buried beneath all the wounds she'd left. "And Dad?" I asked. "He's in a nursing home," Michael said. "He doesn't speak much anymore." We stood there awkwardly. I felt the old anger rise inside me, hot and familiar. But beneath it, something else stirred pity. Maybe. Or the ghost of love that refused to die completely. He looked at me again, eyes pleading. I lost everything. Liv, my business, my wife, my home. I can't fix what I did to you, but I needed you to know I'm not the same person anymore. I wanted to believe him, but trust, once shattered. It doesn't rebuild with words, it rebuilds with time. If it ever rebuilds at all, take care of yourself, I said quietly. Then I walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the mother who raised me, the father who ignored me, the brother who betrayed me. I realized something I had never admitted before, despite everything. I still love them, not the way I used to, blindly and selflessly, but with a distant, compassionate love, the kind you give from afar when you've accepted that closeness only brings pain. Weeks passed. I wrote about the encounter in my journal, the one I kept since the writing workshop. The pages became my confessional, my sanctuary. As I poured my thoughts onto paper, I noticed how my words had changed. There was less bitterness now, more understanding. My story was no longer just about betrayal, it was about transformation. Then came an unexpected letter. It was from the nursing home. My father had passed away. The note was brief. "Mr. Richards requested that you be informed. His belongings are ready for collection." I debated for days before going. When I finally arrived, a nurse handed me a small box. Inside were a few items: his wedding ring, a faded photograph of our family, and a worn-out envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page, written in his familiar script. "Liv, I failed you as a father. I thought love meant control. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you close, by keeping you small. I see now that I only broke you. I hope you find freedom in ways I never could. Love, Dad." I didn't cry right away. The tears came later. When I held the photograph in my hands, the four of us, smiling in front of the old grocery shop, I remembered the smell of oranges, the sound of the sea in the distance, the innocence that once lived in that smile. That night, I drove to the pier again. The sky was a canvas of muted colors, the horizon swallowing the last light of day. I threw the letter into the sea, not out of anger, but as an offering. The paper floated for a moment, then dissolved into the water. As I watched it sink, I whispered, "I forgive you." For the first time, the words felt real. The following weeks passed quietly. I started volunteering at a women's center, helping others who had suffered from family exploitation and financial abuse. Listening to their stories reminded me of who I used to be: lost, dependent, afraid, and it filled me with purpose to help them find their voice. One day, after a workshop, a young woman approached me. She was trembling as she spoke. "I read your book," she said. "I left my parents' house because of it. I wanted to say thank you." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. "You did that yourself," I said. "You just needed someone to tell you it was okay to choose yourself." That night, I walked home under the glow of streetlights, the air cool against my skin. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had found. I had no family left, at least not by blood, but I had built a new one through the women I helped, the friends who saw me, the quiet moments I finally gave myself. And in that realization, I understood something I had spent my entire life searching for. Family isn't defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who shares your pain and still stands beside you when the world falls apart. The sea, the betrayal, the revenge, all of it had led me here. To peace, to meaning, to myself. I looked up at the night sky and whispered softly, "I'm finally home." The morning after I whispered those words to the sky, something inside me felt different, lighter, as if the ocean itself had carried away the last traces of anger that once anchored my soul. I woke up to soft sunlight pouring through the curtains, the kind of light that doesn't blind but warms gently, like forgiveness. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up feeling afraid of the day. I just breathed. The world moved slower after that. My life wasn't suddenly perfect, but it was mine, fully mine. No one was pulling the strings anymore. I made my own breakfast, opened my window to the city noise, and smiled at the sound of life going on around me. I was no longer a ghost trapped in a story of loss. I was the author, finally holding the pen. But healing isn't linear. Some days, the past still knocked on my door. I would smell something cinnamon, sea salt. Even cheap laundry soap and memories would flood back my mother's hands. My father's voice. Michael's laughter when we were kids and didn't yet know how to hurt each other. Those memories didn't wound me anymore, but they lingered like faded scars, reminders that I had survived. One afternoon, while volunteering at the Women's Center, I received an email from a publishing house. They had found my self-published book online and wanted to republish it under a larger imprint. They called it a powerful story of generational pain, justice, and self-liberation. I reread the message 3 times, my heart racing. For so long, my words had been born from pain, written in the quiet between tears. Now, those same words had the chance to help thousands of others find their voice. When the book was officially released, I attended a small launch event, nothing glamorous, just a cozy room with shelves of books and the faint smell of coffee. I was nervous, standing at the front with a microphone in my hand. My palms were sweaty. But when I looked out at the small crowd, I saw faces filled with warmth, women of all ages, holding my story in their hands, their eyes shimmering with silent understanding. A woman in her 50s stood up and said, "I wish I had read this 20 years ago. Maybe I would have left sooner." Her voice cracked, and the room fell silent. I wanted to hug her, to tell her that leaving late is still leaving. That healing has no deadline. When the event ended, people came up to me, one by one, to share pieces of their own lives, fractured, bruised, but still beating with hope. I realized then that pain, when spoken aloud, loses its power to isolate. Every story shared was another chain broken. Later that evening, as I walked home with my signed copies pressed against my chest, the city lights blurred in the misty air, I stopped at a small cafe near my apartment and ordered tea. The waitress, a young girl with tired eyes, recognized me from the newspaper article about the book. "Your story," she said softly. "My mom read it. She said it made her forgive herself for leaving." I smiled. Then it did exactly what it was meant to. As I sipped my tea, I looked out the window and thought about how life had come full circle. Once, I had been the one seeking shelter in others. Now, I was helping others find their shelter within themselves. That realization brought tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but gratitude. Months later, I decided to visit my hometown one last time. It had been 2 years since my parents' deaths and my last conversation with Michael. I didn't go there for closure anymore. I went because I wanted to see the place without the ghosts. When I arrived, the town looked smaller. The streets I once feared felt gentler. The grocery shop I grew up in was now a flower store. The scent of roses and soil replaced the musty air of the past. I stood outside for a while before walking in. The woman behind the counter smiled. "Can I help you?" I looked around the shop, sunlight spilling across potted daisies, shelves filled with green vines, the sound of wind chimes by the door. "No," I said quietly. "I just wanted to see how beautiful this place has become." She nodded, perhaps sensing something deeper in my voice, and handed me a small white rose. "Take it," she said, "for peace." I thanked her and walked toward the beach. The one I used to escape to as a child when home felt too heavy. The sea was calm, its rhythm steady, as if it had been waiting for me to return. I sat on a rock and placed the white rose on the water. It floated gently, drifting toward the horizon. As the waves lapped at my feet, I closed my eyes and thought of my parents, of Michael, of the life I'd built after them. I forgive you, I whispered again, but I also forgive myself for staying too long, for believing too much, for breaking before I learned how to bend. The tide carried the flower away, and with it, the last pieces of bitterness I had left. When I opened my eyes, I saw a small boy running along the shore, laughing as his mother chased after him. Their joy echoed in the air, pure, simple, unburdened. And in that moment, I realized something profound: life always finds a way to begin again. Even after destruction, love always returns. Not in the people who hurt us, but in the moments that remind us why we're still here. I left the beach that day with a calm heart. I no longer needed revenge to feel powerful, or forgiveness to feel whole. I had learned that true freedom isn't about getting even, it's about letting go without losing yourself. A year later, my book became a documentary. The producers asked if I wanted to appear on camera. I declined. I told them the story wasn't about my face. It was about every woman who ever gave too much and finally learned to give to herself. But I did record the closing narration, my voice trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from truth. In that recording, I said, "To anyone who's been betrayed by the people you love, I want you to know, you are not broken. You are being rebuilt. You are the proof that even in ruins, something beautiful can grow again. So please, don't stop choosing yourself. Every day, every breath. Because the world needs your survival story too." When the documentary aired, I received messages from strangers around the world, from daughters, mothers, wives, and sisters who saw themselves in my words. Their gratitude filled me in ways I didn't know I needed. It wasn't fame I had found. It was connection. Now, years later, I live by the sea again. My home is small, quiet, filled with books and sunlight. I write every morning and walk every evening along the same shore where my old life ended and my new one began. Sometimes I still think of them, my parents, my brother, but not with pain, just understanding. Because some stories don't end with revenge or justice. They end with peace, the kind you build slowly, with patience, honesty, and love for yourself. If my story has found you, maybe it's because you needed to hear that it's never too late to start again. So, if this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, not for me, but for the countless others who are still trapped in silence, still believing they're alone. Leave a comment, share your story, and let someone know that healing is possible. Because it is. It always is.